Hi, everyone. I did a rash thing this morning and threw the script that I'd carefully prepared out the window, metaphorically. The last time I did this was at my friend's wedding. I was the best man, and the bride didn't speak to me for 2 years. True story. And given my jet lag, it feels like the equivalent of 3 shots of whiskey, so to anyone that I inadvertently insult along the way, I apologize. But I think something that really struck me this morning is just how difficult it is for a responsible company to do business in this environment. I was at Advertising Week in New York just a short time ago, and I ran into a group of venture capitalists who were playing buzzword bingo. And for all of the words that they were looking for, all of these overused terms and phrases, they were ticking off a box and hoping to win a pot of money they'd put together. Now, that sort of environment is awesome if you're an entrepreneur or a venture capitalist, but it makes doing business in the real world, in this world, very, very difficult. Because if you don't approach people with a shrill, overly optimistic, futuristic sales pitch, if you're saying that everything is not going to be entirely okay, that there's limitations to what we can do right now and in the immediate future, well, it's a difficult trick, right? And I'm counting on you to attune your ears just a bit, maybe ratchet down your expectations as I speak, because I'm taking a different strategy here. I want to tell you that there's a silver lining, but that means there's a cloud. And what we're dealing with here is a future with immense possibilities, but it means we need to be more and more responsible about how we use the tools that we're developing and recognize their limitations. So I say all this as a preface to the title of my presentation, Data is Only Human, and I know that for some of you, perhaps sick of hearing about data and big data, I ask that you listen with an open mind. Because some of the things I'm about to say are probably things you're not hearing as much as you should. And for those of you who are just so excited, enthusiastic, and optimistic about the future, I also ask that you listen with an open mind, because some of the things I say may serve to damper your enthusiasm. And I don't mean to do this in a discouraging way. I think that the vitality of small companies and entrepreneurs is something we must cherish. These are people who are defining our future. But if you're working in advertising and marketing right now, you need to think about the next 3 months, the next 3 years, maybe even the next 5 to 10 years. And in that time frame, we're going to be dealing with something that's really much more brittle and quirky than some may suggest. So, how is data human? Well, there's 2 ways, really. One is the saying, data, it's only human. It's not infallible. It's not a panacea. It's not going to solve every problem. It's like Hal in that Stanley Kubrick film, 2001. It's touchy, and beware of putting your full faith and trust in everything it says. You really have to create a more sophisticated relationship with big data. And then big data is only human in the way that Soylent Green was people. I mean, when we talk about big data in the marketing world, we're talking about instrumenting people, and that instrumentation, all those measurements, are collected and interpreted by people or by systems that were designed by people. And that sort of last mile problem, if you will, is something that we need to acknowledge and address and really understand as well. See if this clicker works here. So I say all this with some foresight. I gave a similar presentation at the Kin Lian Awards just a few months ago. Believe it or not, that was a more intimidating environment than the one I'm in now. We had flown in our best clients from all over the world to meet the best of Exponential, our executive team, on a yacht, which was rented and placed strategically near the event. And then there was me doing what I considered to be one of my best big data presentations. And the result was less than stellar. I think I'm embarrassed to admit that at the time I thought people might be getting seasick. I mean, that's how strongly I believed in what I was saying. And it didn't occur to me until later that I was really causing some discomfort for people who were either on the technology side and being confronted with the reality that not everything is working the way they thought, or people on the more creative and advertising side who are feeling more and more that they're being imposed upon, that they're asking to structure their work in a rigorous way that really is not part of the motivation for why they joined this industry in the first place. So this is a familiar feeling for me. And to explain that, I need to go way back to, well, to talk a little bit more about myself. It's worth it, I apologize. I used to tell people that I have a graduate degree in statistics, and as introduced, it's actually a degree in quantitative methods in the social sciences. And I noticed the very first day I arrived on campus where we fit on the educational hierarchy, where math and economics and psychology and even sociology were all in the center of campus, sometimes in buildings named for the disciplines, and quantitative methods, I'm not exaggerating, we were in the basement. We were in the basement of the International Studies building, way off to the side, and nobody really liked us. And the problem is that when you're trying to bring these two different sets of thinking together, these two different disciplines, there's a lot of friction, and there's a lack of trust. So quantitative methods in the social sciences, quantitative methods is measurement, math, statistics, econometrics, and to these groups, to these PhD students, we were saying, all of these theories, all of these assumptions that seem so reasonable in the classroom are actually falling apart in the real world. And to the social sciences people, the sociologists and the ethnographers, well, they already had a huge resentment and suspicion of what we were doing, not just because we were bringing this tool to them and saying, well, you need to learn something else, and it's probably not the subject you loved in high school. But, well, I'll explain later. When we start talking about big data and other new technologies, to a layman, we start sounding a bit crazy. Quantitative methods is measuring, and social sciences people. My discipline was in measuring people. And you know what? Big data, when it comes to advertising and marketing, is about measuring people. And you see the same schism in this industry, where you have the technologists and the futurists coming in with wild, exciting new ideas and experiencing what I can only imagine is some frustration in that the uptake is slower than they thought. There's structural impediments to adopting these new ideas. And it's sort of a resentment on the sides of clients and agencies who aren't really sold on the benefit yet. And then on the people side, the clients and agencies, this is not the reason they got into this job. They're really focused on people and how people think and how they react, and there's a love there. There's a wonderful varied understanding of the variety of people we encounter every day, especially as consumers. And big data seems almost like an affront to them. Now, this is where I start ducking and weaving a bit, which is the problem of abandoning my script. For those of you with vertigo, just close your eyes. I'm going to skip this section. So yeah, we're living in a world of hype. And I took my girlfriend to one of these events a few months ago. She's a child of the 80s, and she said to me, this sort of feels like Scarface. I said, what do you mean? She said, well, when people start talking about big data, it's like they're on coke. It's like they're on cocaine. And I can tell you from what I know about this person, she's only knowing this from the 80s movies, which she watched as a teenager, but there are some really strange similarities here. Big data makes you feel smart. It makes you feel sexy. It makes you talk a lot. We seem a little crazy to laymen and to people that are less technologically inclined when we start talking about data. And on our side, me being the big data side, everyone seems to have it, and yet everyone wants more. And I think that the troubling thing, the little footnote that I'd add, is nobody really seems to know what they have or what they're getting. Now, to paraphrase Ricky Gervais from The Office, I'm not advocating the use of illegal drugs in any way. I'm just saying, listen, we need to be careful. We need to be careful how we're talking to one another. This is a section I'll skip. Just some of the more crazy claims I've encountered in the last 6 months about what big data will promise. It's not going to predict terrorist events before they happen. You really need to be in a better position than marketers are to be able to do that. And you're looking for outliers and not correlation. It's not going to cure cancer. I actually checked with my brother-in-law, who's a cancer researcher, even though Time magazine would claim that Google will soon solve death. I have to pity big media these days, or old media. And we're not going to solve Wanamaker's problem of knowing where your advertising dollars are wasted. I mean, that's an unsolvable problem, really. No matter how much we hate to admit it, advertising is an interruptive experience, and even with 100% targeting, which you'll never achieve, you're still going to be finding people resentful to the intrusion. So let's talk about the trick here. How does big data work? It was not a breakthrough in math or statistics, and it was not a breakthrough in technology. What big data really was a shortcut that was enabled by the storage and processing power that we now have. And in the past, you had scientists and data researchers trying to create models with dependent variables based on independent variables, trying to understand the correlation between the two, what was causing one, what was a confounding factor. All of these models were wrong. They were all simplifications, but some proved to be extremely useful. The trick of big data, as Peter Norvig quoted, and I have to thank Chris Anderson from Wired for this explanation. All models are wrong, and increasingly, we don't need them. We're focused entirely on causation. Sorry, we're focused entirely on correlation and abandoning correlation. I said that twice incorrectly. See, even I'm still confused about this. We're setting causation aside. Correlation works when it comes to big data. And the best example I have from this is actually hot tubs. And we did some work for the presidential campaign, Romney versus Obama. And to be fair, we did work for both campaigns. So I'm not taking any political stand here. But one of the most telling characteristics of someone who is a Republican turns out to be an interest in hot tubs. And this was so funny for us because I think we're all still living with the 70s stereotype of what a hot tub really means, and you'd think that the experience of being in a hot tub would make you want to vote Democrat, or at least think about voting Democrat. But in actuality, in America today, this is what hot tubs are used for. Older people, Caucasians, wealthy, rural and suburban, and all of these things fit so neatly into the Republican voting bloc. And we know online people who are Republicans, but we don't know every user that is a Republican. And when we start using big data for these correlations, we find that buying people interested in hot tubs and targeting them with Republican ads proves to be exceptionally useful. I'll have to skip this. If you want the full experience, I'm happy to do another presentation after the show, or invite me to your company. I would love to come to London again. So big data is messy, right? And this is where the human element comes in. Humans live in an analog world. We are analog programs. We are not digital. And this image of Legos strewn about the floor, well, it's even messier than that because Legos are discrete information. They're digital in a way. And we're dealing with an analog world. So all of the beautiful infographics that we come up with come from data that looks even messier. And when you're dealing with analog data, there's a signal-to-noise ratio. The more you listen, the more you get confused. And you'll see this, well, one of the few analog programs you have left on your system is the phone in your camera, which is trying to digitize the analog world that we see. And the more careful, the more data that sensor pulls in, the more noise it pulls in. So with these two cameras, one is far more powerful than the other in how much data it pulls in, but it's really starting to pull in more noise than anything else. So a great example of how we simplify in an infographic type way what we're seeing, well, this is the mess that I deal with behind the curtain. And these are the sort of graphs that I present to the industry. And what it's showing is that the harder you listen, the more you're going to be led astray. And for some verticals like auto and clothing, if you start going back too far in the user journey before the purchase, your data actually becomes negative. Your understanding becomes worse than a flip of the coin or some random allocation of inventory because of all of the confounding factors that enter the picture. Measurement is a poor proxy. Sorry, I have to skip this one with this very slow clicker. Come on. You can tell I have an MBA with the 4x4 graph. Big data misses the basics. Now, this is something that's really important to me because it's a huge misconception in the industry. And just to be extremely thorough, I looked into this and found that there's a very small percentage of the population that in fact have dual gender. But if you look at the cookies that come in that we manage on our database, fed by our own data and through third-party data, and these are the best third-party vendors we can identify, the overlap is 14%, meaning our cookies have both genders assigned to them, and the error rate between these third parties that we contract with is 32%. Again, flipping a coin would give you a 50% error rate, so this is pretty shocking. But as it turns out, it's really not very important. If you look at how demographics feed in to an understanding of a person, they're very brute, they're very rough and unpredictive characteristics. And for someone who's about to turn an ungodly age, it's actually refreshing to me to know that I'm not defined by my age or my gender or my ethnicity or where I live or my income. All of these are subsumed by what I'm interested in, what I'm looking at, what I'm reading about. That's that blue line that we're showing there. And this is the logarithmic scale. So what I'm saying is the old method of looking at demographics and packaging into stereotypes and cohorts, that's really missing the picture. So big data misses the basics. Okay, it's not that big a deal. When we start talking about stereotypes, when we start saying, oh, we're gonna market to soccer moms, that's not a person, that's a stereotype, that's an assumption. And you're looking at this image and imagining what her home looks like, what her husband does for a living. I mean, our minds were designed to create patterns and associations, and this is something we developed on the plains of Africa when we were still developing this wonderful tool, which has many layers, by the way. This is the reptilian layer that needs to make quick assumptions and is happier. It's a shortcut. We save mental energy by thinking of people in terms of soccer mom, and that does a huge disservice. That does a huge disservice to every single person we deal with who are not easily summarized with, 30 or so different demographic characteristics. That's an old media tactic. Again, I don't mean to insult anyone, but the thing that's nice about big data is it forces us to look beyond that. It forces us to look at the granularity, at the inconsistencies, at the beauty of the variety of mankind. And just as an example for soccer moms, we were asked to buy a soccer mom segment from a third party, and just for my own edification, I ran our data against it and found that, well, soccer mom can mean 4 basic things: overprotective parents, women interested in handbags and luxury cars, suburbs or exurb life, and of course parents that are genuinely interested in soccer, and in the United States that's a very small percentage. Now this advertiser was interested in one or maybe two of these, and we can go even deeper into this to understand how many children they have, what were they concerned about, what were they struggling with, or likewise, what were the handbags and cars that these people were interested in. That's what big data brings us. It forces us to abandon our natural way of thinking, which is actually doing a huge disservice to the people we're trying to communicate with. I'm going to have to skip this one as well. It's a shame because this is one of my favorite studies. But it speaks to, people's relationship with dogs is incredibly varied, and we had to surprise the manufacturer with this. And this is going to be true, and it's probably already true with our relationship with our phones, hello Siri, and bikes, autos. As these devices become smarter and more personable, our relationship with them is going to become more nuanced, more different, and everyone is going to be approaching their phones and the programs on their phones in a different way. So, big data is going to inform this approach. It's going to make everything a lot better, but we really need to understand its limitations. And I'll leave you with a very brief analogy. When incandescent light was invented, people immediately fit it into the paradigm they knew, which was the moon. And they erected these enormous incandescent lights in the center of town that were designed to replicate the moon. Aurora, Illinois was named after this project. And it proved to be a complete and total failure. I mean, it was very distracting. The parallax that was generated by these streams of light was disorienting. If you were behind a building, you were suddenly in the dark. And I think the most depressing thing for me is that all the waterfowl died because they didn't know when to sleep. They lost their natural circadian rhythms. So when it comes to big data or any other tool, we need to think carefully about how is it going to be applied, and think small and think targeted, think spotlights, think the back screen, think projector lights. This intelligent application of the tools that we have is going to be very, very important. And if you're looking for advice on that, please come talk to me or anyone at Exponential. We've been working with big data since the last hype machine in '99, and I think we have a lot of good things to say. But again, if you're hearing nothing but hype, if you're hearing nothing but platitudes, you're hearing the wrong thing. It's a more complicated world out there, and quite frankly, we need you to help guide the industry through it. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Bryan. Thanks for being the human face of data science today. There's some great stats on there. The fact that the gender error rate, 32%, is not that important, but behavior does. You must have loads of weird insights about hot tubs and people who buy certain cars, who do this, who do that. And I guess we've got the opportunity of going higher up the funnel for campaign planning here. And so to what extent is Exponential sort of fighting against decades and decades worth of traditional targeting techniques when they could be using this to begin their thinking?
So, our studies are either validating what advertisers already know, and in that case we're deepening the picture, we're showing where these people can be found, or we're challenging their assumptions. And this is often true in the digital world where your online demographic is markedly different from your offline. And the dog example, which I unfortunately had to skip through, was a small manufacturer of high-end dog food that just assumed that these people were babying their pets. They had such a high value on their animals. And what we showed that is, in fact, there's a definite segment of these buyers who are more concerned about their children. The pets were for their children, and they were wanting to make sure that the pet didn't die because that would upset the child, and also that the pet was healthy and had no worms and fleas and so forth and had a shiny coat because it was a living stuffed animal for their children. So these are the sort of nuances that we hope to break apart when you're starting with this basic demographic. And again, that's the way our brain wants to work, and we really have to force and think hard and drink some cups of coffee to understand the nuances of who we're trying to target.
Well, congratulations on a great business, which is becoming cocaine rock and roll now. So thank you indeed for entertaining us today.
Thank
Bryan,
you.
thank you very much.